Oh, hey there, scratch building junkies. Welcome to Busted Robot. This episode, I'm going to be turning one of my beautiful baby dolls into a post-apocalyptic graffiti-covered punk rock girl bot. Stay tuned, it's going to be awesome. I agree. They don't understand us. They think it's weird a grown man collecting baby dolls. Alright, so first I need to decide which of my precious dolls I want to part with. We've got, who is this? Jasmine? Pocahontas? The other doll has teeth I'd probably want to remove, so we'll go with whoever this one is. It's not Pocahontas. Wonder Woman? Rookie doll disassembly mistake here as I try to literally rip her head off. Always look for the screw at the base of the neck, brother. I won't lie, I do feel like a bit of a creeper disassembling this doll. Do you guys like serial killer documentaries? Then I have some old craft store Christmas bulbs laying around that might make for a good robot skull, but I'm not entirely sure about it, so I get out the old pencil and paper to explore some ideas. I am not the best at drawing human faces, so I do feel a little vulnerable sharing this, but it was an important part of the process, and it doesn't need to be a piece of art unto itself. With that done, I have a better idea of which parts of the doll face I want to keep. I tack the face and bulb together with some hot glue, and then do some final shaping with the shears. Here I'm marking off the parts I'll cut away to make room for the ears. For those I'll use some caps from shampoo pump bottles. Then into the sanding chamber for an aggressive round of scuffing. Then I go hunting for some more bits and find this little spray head that fits quite nicely in the ear cap, once I jam a little foam clay in there for support. I tack the ears in position with a little duct tape and then hot glue them in place. The eyes are up next, and before I lock them in place, I want to see what some cabochon designs will look like, just to get a sense of how large the eyes should be and how far apart I want to place them. These 35mm cabochons fit perfectly in milk jug caps. While I think these pupil designs are a little too large, it's enough to give me confidence in the placement of the caps, so I go ahead and tack those in place with some more hot glue. With that structure in place, I can start using 2-part epoxy clay to shape her skull. The first step is to lay down a thin layer of clay over the Christmas ornament and around her eyes, just to get a solid base to work on. Working with epoxy clay is always harrowing. You're on the clock, so you're itching to get to work with it, but it's also less sticky and much easier to work with if you let it begin curing a bit first. So you really do have to strike a balance between patience and time management. I smooth it out with a wet finger and then get it into the sanding chamber to get rid of some of the bumpier parts. Then I do another layer of clay to bulk out the areas around the eyes. This whole first part of the build just filled me with crushing self-doubt. This sculpture's gonna suck, it looks like Ant-Man, you peaked with that T-Rex build, they're all gonna laugh at you. They're all gonna laugh at you! They're all gonna laugh at you! Working with a curved shape presents a whole slew of challenges. And here I'm using a technique I learned from Evil Ted. He uses tape to make patterns for foam masks for cosplay and stuff. And at this stage, I'm still considering using foam instead of clay for the final layer because I'm just not certain I can achieve the level of smoothness and precision I'll need with clay. Ultimately, I do decide to go with clay, but the patterns are still helpful because I can cut the clay to shape and lay it on the sculpture without having to do a ton of finessing afterwards. Then I use my reamer tool to hollow out a few spots on her face and head. I forgot to hit record, but I do add a thin strip of foam here last minute. I want her head to look like pieces of the outer shell have peeled off, leaving other layers exposed below. I ream out a few more holes and then get her in the sanding box for one last round of smoothing. I want her to have 2 busted antennae at the top of her head that she's fashioned into pigtails, so here I'm working out how to build those. I've got some conduit, a broth jug lid, and a plastic shelf spacer ready to be slotted into an orifice reducer. I need to cut those little plastic bits off the inside of the broth cap, but first I'll slice through the cap and perform a quick blood draw. Diffusion of blood. Diffusion of blood. Oh, hey look, it's Busted Robot merch. Check out these dope stickers at bustedrobot.com. I've also got some cool t-shirt, hoodie, and hat designs. Great way to support the channel. We'll put this right here in the corner. I don't know, is that tacky? Here, I'll just cover it with this coffee mug. Not crazy about the texture on that cap, so I cover it with a strip of foam. Now we can start getting those antennae in place. When I cored out the hole for the orifice reducer on the other side of the head, it ended up cracking the clay, so on this side I'm going to modify the reducer and glue it to the surface. More conduit and a bit of heat to bend it into shape. Then for the other ear, I find this cool little spacer I stick in some foam clay and glue into place. Then for some machinery behind the ears, I've got this old Philips Hue tap switch that I'll disassemble. More foam clay just to tack it in, and then hot glue to make it permanent. Then I've got some gears from an old printer that I'll glue to that. Then I've got this little baby conduit from a Connects kit. My sister-in-law gave me about a half a metric ton of this stuff for Christmas. Thanks, Sarah. Doing a little damage to the top of the conduit here. Then filling in another helmet gap with some foam. Now I'm going to start building out her neck. For that, I have a bunch of pens and a printer spool that I'll Dremel down to size and prep for painting. For where her neck meets the plinth, I'll use this laundry detergent tab container lid. I ream that bad boy out to make room for the neck pipe, which will then embed in the skull with copious amounts of hot glue. Here I'm just gluing in all those pen caps and shaping some conduit with the armature wire to stick in there. Now I'll get the doll face masked off so I can prime and base coat the sculpture. We'll use a quick coat of Flex Bond to seal the foam parts. Then we'll mask off everything that's not going to be pink and get our white primer on. Hey look, Clara, I finally got an airbrush. That's exciting. Planning out some graffiti here. Everyone a brick last time when I said I used AI for one of my tag designs, so I'm designing this one with my own brain and hands. This is honestly not great, but I don't know, kind of took me back to 6th grade Mr. Custer's class, sitting there with my Trapper Keeper drawing Megadeth logos and stuff on it. But try to be gentle in the comments. Just because I have a beard and listen to Infant Annihilator doesn't mean I don't have feelings, you know? Anyway, now that I've got the hero graffiti designed, I'm going to mask that portion off so I don't have to paint it pink just to repaint it white later. Back to the spray booth. Now I go in and transfer that graffiti design back onto the helmet. Then more masking and a black base coat for all the metallic parts as per usual. Now that we've got the base coat down, I can go back with a brighter shade of pink and then get started on the graffiti. And while we do that, how about some shout outs? Shout out to Devil's Custom Creatures for doing a busted robot inspired dragon head over on his channel. Nothing really tops seeing another creator inspired by your work. I'll link his channel in the description, so go check it out. Shout out to Space Champy for writing a short story about the history of last episode's Dinobot. Freaking awesome, dude. Shout out to the Fox Mage 1 for pointing out that metals rust differently and that a little contrast is a good thing. Advice I take into consideration on this build. Shout out to Sniff Sniff Snicked, Issa Barijan, AJ Askins3265, and Darth Kurai for expressing their opinions of the use of AI without getting all shamey about it. Shout out to Miss Merck for giving me some things to research regarding ethical AI and home rolling your own models. Shout out to Tyler Mathis8590 for defending my honor in the comments against my first legit hater. I knew it was only a matter of time until someone left a comment that stung, but it's okay. It's okay. I'm not butthurt about it. I mean, I didn't love the tone, but people are allowed to disagree with me. That's totally cool. I'm a big boy. I can take the high road on this. But creatively bankrupt is kind of a wild thing to say to another human being. Like, that's a lot. And disappointing? I mean, that's not condescending at all. You're not mad, you're just disappointed. You. Who are you, my dad? I mean, they literally typed the words, shame on you. I mean, who says that? Who actually says that? I thought we were friends. To be fair, I did ask. I asked, what do you guys think of my use of AI here? And you didn't like it, and it hurt my feelings. It hurt my feelings. But who the says shame on you? Disappointing. I don't even know you. You don't get to be disappointed in me. I'm disappointed in me, okay? That's my job, you and drop by machine. Nah, that. That entirely, you self try hard. Listen here, brother, because you just stepped into the ring, whether you meant to or not. And when these 24-inch pythons of emotionally unstable, crafting energy start running wild, there's only one question left to ask, brother. What you gonna do when I take all this unprocessed shame and channel it into a grown man aggressively disassembling a child's doll on camera? Or what you gonna do when the busted robot nation runs wild on you? Ah!
Definitely not butthurt.
In all seriousness, I think what got that hater all judgy, maybe even more than the use of AI, was the perceived theft of other graffiti artists' style. And I'm sympathetic to that. But to be clear, I'm not a graffiti artist and I'm not trying to be one. I'm just a dude making weird robot sculptures, and sometimes I pull in visual elements like graffiti to make them feel more real and part of a world. Should I learn to do graffiti properly? Yeah, probably, but right now, I'm juggling sculpting, painting, weathering, lighting, filming, editing, packaging this for YouTube. If I try to master everything all at once, I'm never going to post anything. I mean, I spend 8 hours an episode just editing out all the weird gulping and sighing noises I make between sentences. So yeah, for now, I'm taking some shortcuts, but I will try to do better, especially when it comes to tags or recognizable designs. This piece I'm drawing now, for example, it's an existing design, the Wildhearts smiley bones. I'm not claiming it as mine, I'm just using it as a fun way to connect the sculpture back to what inspired it. Maybe this is a rationalization, but I tend to think of what I'm doing here as somewhere between set design and homage, where you pull something from one context and use it in another. But am I Public Enemy sampling Angel of Death and building on it, or am I just P. Diddy saying yeah over Kashmir? There's a spectrum, and it hurts my butt a little to think I might be on the wrong end of it. But where I think I am adding something is in what happens when you take this imagery out of its original context and drop it into a completely new one. I'm using it to say something about this robot's world. That in this place, the robot isn't special, it's just part of the environment, like a trash can or a train car that, yeah, it just gets tagged. And as harsh as that hater's comment was, I think it bothered me because I hadn't really thought any of this through. I just did what I thought looked cool. And that's a pretty good way to end up on the wrong side of the line between homage and theft. For anyone who cares about this, I'll start listing the graffiti in the description and whether it's original or inspired by something else. And if you're coming from a graffiti background and that still rubs you the wrong way, I get it, seriously. But I'm not out here claiming that culture or trying to pass myself off as something I'm not. As for AI, that's a whole nother conversation. I'll just say this. I'm a technology optimist. I know there's some ugly parts to how this stuff was developed, past and present, but I have a lot of faith in people to figure it out and use these tools to create things that we can't even imagine yet. I know that's not a popular take in the creative community right now, and that's fine. If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to do it in the comments, as long as we keep it constructive. Anyway, back to gluing plastic trash together. Now going in with a sponge and some pink paint to make the graffiti look a bit worn. Then some white and black sponging. This stage is a lot of back and forth between weathering and unweathering when I realize I've gone too far. It should be fun, but it's definitely a high self-doubt part of the build as I'm literally destroying all the hard work I put in before this. Then weathering the edges with some metallic paint before finally peeling off the face masking. I had to work hard to resist the urge to do this sooner. It's really tough to tell if you're making good design choices when half your build looks like Cobra Commander. After applying a few coats of matte spray varnish off camera to protect the graffiti, I apply a light noosh wash. I'm trying to get better at applying the wash a bit more judiciously. While it does help tie everything together, the wash has a tendency to muddy things up. For this hole in her head, I have a grommet I'll use for a lip and tuck some wire mesh behind it. I had a lot of trouble getting this grommet to stick in there and ended up using way too much CA glue and baking soda. What a mess. That came out a lot gnarlier than I was going for. But that's the nice thing about being busted robot and not fresh off the factory floor robot. My shoddy workmanship becomes an asset. Alright, time to get some rust up in this mother. I'll be using a mix of standard dirty down plus the yellow variant. The yellow on its own can sometimes be a bit much, but it's a nice accent to mix in for variety. I do try to leave a little more of the metal exposed as a steely gray for contrast. Probably still went too far, but what can I say? I love rust. Time to start working on her pigtails. We'll start with some more of the Connects corrugated tubing. I want them to be a degraded mix of pink paint covered metal and rust, so into the spray booth for some more base coating. Then while we wait for that to dry, we'll start working on her face. GAC 100 is a popular low VOC option for priming this kind of vinyl-y doll face material. It goes on really thin, stays visually smooth, but gives it just enough tooth for paint to grab onto. So a few thin coats of that followed up by a base coat of Vallejo ivory. I mixed this a little too thin. Look at all those bubbles. Fortunately, it all levels out just fine, and after about 3 coats, it looks pretty darn good. Then a few coats of golden gloss waterborne varnish to give her skin that healthy porcelain glow. Now we can go to town on her hair. Just a mishmash of wires, guitar strings, cables, what have you. This part's a lot of fun, honestly. Then a noosh wash with some dirty brown. I don't leave the wash on long at all. I just want it to look like aged porcelain with some streaks of grime coming down from under her goggles. Now we'll apply some lipstick. I have a brief flash of panic when I realize I have no idea how to apply lipstick. Oh gosh, she looks like Joan Crawford. I add a few different color washes to add some depth and grit to it. Once the lips are good enough, I add a final coat of rust to her hair and a few other assorted pieces. Now I've got this cap from an antigen test tube that will make a perfect little cheek gauge for her once we rust it up a bit. A few little finishing rusty details and we can finally give her some eyes. These cabochon eyes were nearly the death of me. Glamour Seal and Dimensional Magic, which are things I would usually use, just gave me nothing but bubbles and streaks. I eventually caved and used UV resin, which worked better, but it's just not my favorite thing to mess with. I think the issue is these 35mm cabochons are just big enough that the odds of imperfections go way up, but I can live with these. With that nightmare behind us, we're finally ready to mount our head on the plinth. Then just a quick dry brush with a little metallic paint to highlight the edges a bit, and we're out of here. Well, here she is. I think she came out really great. I'm particularly happy with how the porcelain effect came out. Experimenting with different textures and levels of gloss is a pretty big step forward for me. I'm also super pumped with how this Wildhearts smiley logo came out. If I look back to the first episode of the show, there's just no way I would have been able to pull off a design like that. So it's pretty exciting to see some tangible creative growth happening. Now let's talk about the Wildhearts. If you like a band that sticks to a formula, the Wildhearts are not for you. These guys are all over the place in the best possible way. They constantly bounce between sounds that really shouldn't work together and yet somehow do. But it's that combination of super heavy riffs with catchy, poppy choruses that I just don't think anybody does it better than the Wildhearts. So if you want to get into them, the album PHUQ is an excellent place to start. Riffs galore, more hooks than a Hellraiser movie. It's melodic, it's catchy, it's unpredictable, and it's a ton of fun. Just like you. Thanks for sticking around. Stay tuned for the Glamour Shots. And as always, keep making it weird.
What you gonna do, brother? What you gonna do when the busted robot mission